Hello, my name is Donald Peck. I'm pastor at the Loamy United Methodist Church in Loamy, Illinois. I've been preparing these weekly devotionals for those of you who need something like this for your in-home worship. So today's lesson comes from two sources, 2 Samuel chapter 11 and then John chapter 6. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, we see a brief section of the sin of David, the big sin where he steals Bathsheba from her husband Uriah. So, let's begin. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army, and they destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. And one evening David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing on her roof. The woman was very beautiful. So David sent someone to find out about her, and the man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her, and she came to him, and he slept with her. And then she went back home. Now the woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. And when Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was, and how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. And then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the palace entrance with all of his master's servants, and did not go down to his house. Now David was told, and Uriah did not go home, they said. So he asked Uriah, "Why haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said, "The ark and the Israel and Judah are staying in tents. And my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." So David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And at David's invitation he ate and drank at the palace, and David made him drunk. But in the evening Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants, and he did not go home. So in the morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In the letter he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is the fiercest, and then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." Wow. Now in John chapter 6, we see an entirely different scene in the person of Jesus Christ. So it reads like this. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up and says, "Hey, here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" So Jesus says, "Have the people sit down." And there was a lot of grass in that hillside, and they sat down. There was about 5,000 men. So Jesus then took the loaves and gave thanks and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. And when they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, David in 2 Samuel chapter 11, which is what we just read, is a different man. This is not the man David that we see in the story of David in 1 Samuel. Oh man, he was a shepherd boy. He took out the Philistine army with his little sling and a smooth rock. He devoted himself to God. He wrote psalms about his devotion to God. He devoted himself to Israel. He devoted himself to Saul. And Saul, in his misery over his own life, and inspired on by the prophet's prediction that David would be king, Saul put out a contract on the head of David. Wanted David dead. And in the midst of all of that, David discovered Saul taking a nap in a little cave in the cliff of the mountain. And he sneaked up on Saul, took a piece of his cloak that Saul was still wearing, and with his knife cut off the corner of this cloak, and then waited for Saul to wake up. So when Saul awakens, here's David with a knife in one hand, a piece of cloak in the other, and he says, "Saul, why do you try to kill me? Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave, and some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed." And in this passage, David is pledging his allegiance to Saul. Here, David is most sensitive, resisting his opportunity to kill Saul. And yet, in the lesson we just read, we see a David who takes what he wants without regard to the consequences. And so when Bathsheba announces her pregnancy, David begins his cover-up of the indiscretion, and when that does not work, he murders her husband Uriah. So we see the two contrasts in David. In 1 Samuel, David is a giver of life. In 2 Samuel, David is the taker of life. Wow. In contrast, John records Jesus as a giver of life in the story of the boy with the barley loaves and smoked fish. Jesus had been teaching all day long, and there were 5,000 men, according to the gospel writer. Now, when you add wives and children, the count could be as high as 15,000 people. And the people were then organized into groups, seated on the grass, and Jesus blessed the food, and the baskets never emptied until all seated had had their fill, and then there was food left over for another outing with the disciples and Jesus. I don't know if you've seen 15,000 people on a pasture on a hillside. I have. I've been to rallies. I've been to outdoor concerts. most specific I remember, and it was really, really a pleasant night in Chicago on the lawn of Grant Park. And there was a jazz festival going on. Music played all day long, but the headliners came out when the sun set. And about an hour before the sunset, everybody who was going to be at the concert was there. And there were blankets spread out all over the grass, little tables set up. Some people went into a lot of effort to have a really nice dinner with card tables and candles and champagne and nice food, pâtés and crackers, and the smell of food was all over the area. And so what the scene was me at the edge of the seating of the arena, looking back towards the grassy knoll, so to speak, or the grassy part of Grant Park. And there were just literally hundreds and hundreds of blankets. The jazz musicians playing some sort of a Herbie Hancock piece in the background. And here is everybody enjoying one another's presence over tables, over blankets, picnic baskets, take-out wrappings and take-out sacks, and everybody enjoying one another's presence. And it was a memory that I'll never forget, was that scene. Soft jazz in the background and everybody's contentment with the evening, with each other's presence, and a picnic lunch or dinner. That was a pleasant night, and I can picture that being the same sort of an event on the lawn or the pasture with Jesus, the disciples, and their cloaks laid on the grass, enjoying a meal provided by Jesus. Wow. What a contrast in this lesson. A story of one who takes and the story of one who gives. Well, David, the one who took, his action can be called, and has been called, an anatomy of sin. And quite simply, it was this. David was tempted. He considered the temptation, and he acted upon the temptation. And this process occurs 4 different times in the story. First was the sin of adultery. Second is the first attempt of cover-up. Third is the effort to get Uriah drunk enough to go home and make love to his wife. And fourth is the order to have Uriah murdered at the hands of his Ammonites. Now, Uriah was an innocent soldier, and he was loyal to Yahweh and to Israel and to David. The last part of the anatomy of sin is the sacrifice of the innocent. Uriah was an innocent. And remember, sin is committed in the arena of relationships. Think about the 10 Commandments. Every violation of either one of the 10 Commandments is committed in the arena of either relationship with Yahweh or relationship with mankind. And someone is always hurt. And when you are tempted, when we are tempted, we need to listen to the Holy Spirit, who will caution us to stop and think of the consequences. And in that moment of consideration, when the Holy Spirit speaks to us, we need to stop. Now, another thing to think about in this story is David is seen as a taker, one who sees what he wants and takes it without consideration of the consequences. He's kind of like the Don Corleone of the Old Testament. Now, this action is a long way from the behavior of David, the protector and provider for the sheep. It's hard to believe that he once penned the shepherd song, the 23rd Psalm. Instead of the protector, David is the destroyer of a marriage. And there are people among us in this century who will take, if they have the chance. They'll break into our vehicles and take the vehicles themselves, or whatever is loose in our vehicles that can be carried away. They break into our homes and take our property without regard to our loss. And then, not only that, there are people in our lives that would take, if they had a chance, take our reputation with gossip, slander, false accusations, and by creating chaos and terror, they take our sense of well-being. We have plenty of people in our lives that will take from us. And here's another switch to this. There are times when we take from others. We take from others when we become angry and push people from our lives. And when we do that, we take from them, those who love us, the opportunity to express love and giving and forgiving and in service. And by not forgiving those around us, we take away the experience of reconciliation and love. And by shutting ourselves off from others, we take away the opportunity for friendship and happiness. The one last thing. David and all other public leaders are charged with giving hope and assurance to the poor and the powerless. And when they do not give hope and assurance to the poor and the powerless, they take away the reason to live. Yeah. And the lesson with Jesus, he offered hope, provision, and comfort to all in his reach. And you may do this as well by your open hand of friendship to all in your circle of friends and family. And you do this with the simple acts of kindness, generous gifts of money, possessions, and self-sacrificial love. Now, these two stories are as obvious as billboards along the highway. And each one of us, on many occasions, face a choice, the opportunity to be takers or givers. And like David, we can take and enter into a crime and cover-up. Or like Jesus and that anonymous little boy who had the fishes and the loaves, we can give to people who would otherwise suffer. And in our friendship and our love to others around us, we can give the gift of hope and assurance and comfort when they are in our presence. You decide in your relationships how you want to treat the people in your relationships. Will you take from them or will you give to them? God bless you. I hope this helps.